The Pandemic Prof is made possible by everyone working to keep food on our tables during the pandemic. What shall we do during a pandemic? Make virtue ethics. This week on the Pandemic Prof, it's virtue ethics a la Aristotle. Welcome to the Pandemic Prof. I'm Christina and this week we're cooking up ethics a la Aristotle. In Book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle turns to virtue. He does this because he's already told us that happiness is the life of activity expressing reason well. And we saw that he thinks reason falls into two parts, practical and theoretical. When he talks about expressing reason well, he means to be talking about virtue, and it's no surprise then that he divides virtue also into two types. One, which goes with theoretical reasoning, is called virtue of thought, and the other, which goes with practical reasoning, is called virtue of character. And it's virtue of character that we will be the most interested in, and that Aristotle himself is the most interested in. Virtue of thought is what you have when you're really good at reasoning well about theoretical issues. Virtues of thought are the kinds of virtues that you develop in school. As he says, we develop them mostly from teaching, and they require experience and time. Virtue of character is what you have when you're good at reasoning about practical matters. Virtue of character, then, we gain, says Aristotle, via habituation. Habituation is simply repeating an action so many times that it becomes a sort of second nature to us. For example, if you bake bread regularly, you reach a point when you're kneading the dough where you don't even have to consult the cookbook to know when it's reached the right consistency. You've just done it so many times that it naturally occurs to you that it's now time to let the dough rest. Aristotle wants to say that both virtues of thought and virtues of character are quite important, but we begin habituation at birth. Long before you can understand what generosity is, you've been taught by your parents to share things and to give things freely. These sorts of habits or virtues of character develop in us very early, and so Aristotle says it's very important to focus on them initially, and then we'll develop the virtues of thought if we're fortunate enough to go to universities, especially when it's not pandemic time. You might be puzzled, however, with wondering how one can become habituated to virtuous action if one isn't already virtuous. How will you know what action to perform? Aristotle recognizes this issue and faces it head-on. What he says is that we can begin to perform virtuous actions by chance, or, as he says, by conformity, or following someone else's example. Imagine, if you will, that you're a Spartan soldier, and you've been training your entire life for your first battle, but you haven't been in battle before. You're going to be quite anxious and you won't have had the chance to be brave in battle. Fortunately, the Spartans were quite aware of the problem, and so they made sure that the person on your left and the person on your right would be veteran soldiers, so that as you stood there holding your shield in one arm and your spear in the other, you could, at your battles, just follow the directions of the people on either side of you, and at the end of the battle you would have done brave things without having to think too hard about it. Of course, just doing a brave action once is not enough to make you brave, in the same way that baking one delicious loaf of sourdough bread is not enough to make you a baker. Rather, you need to continue to do these actions, and Aristotle says that there are 3 particular conditions that you must meet in order to become brave. First, he says, the agent must know that what they're doing is the brave action. Second, the agent must decide to do the thing he knows is brave, and to do it for its own sake. This seems demanding, and indeed it's the first time we've seen Aristotle bring motivation into his theory of ethics. But imagine that again, that you're that Spartan soldier, and that you've been fighting bravely all along because you are in love with the fair Penelope. So when the soldiers on either side of you fight bravely, you follow their lead and you fight bravely too. After a while, you know what the brave thing to do is. But if you decide to do the brave thing simply because of your love for Penelope and attempt to impress her, well then what will happen when Penelope breaks up with you? Your motivation to do the brave thing is gone, and you are not brave. Instead, if you want to become brave, you must be thinking primarily for your desire to be brave. Third, he says, an agent must perform the action from a firm and unchanging state. This is the hardest part of being virtuous rather than simply performing virtuous actions, because to do it from a firm and unchanging state means even as the opposing army rushes towards you and you're holding your shield and you're holding your spear, and now you're the veteran and you have a new soldier to your left and to your right, you, to be brave, must be doing the right actions for the right reasons, and you mustn't be thinking to yourself, I still have time to run away, or I could just duck behind this fine fellow here and everything would be okay. Instead, you have to be resolute in the virtue.